Okay, do you want to immediately start with your statement?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Daylan Tanseco. Your Honor, this is a case in violation of law under the RA 7610, or the Special Protection of Children Against Abuse, Exploitation and Discrimination Act, and also Republic Act 7877, or Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995, also in violation of the Ethical Codes of Teachers. In any legal basis, a teacher should adhere to the code of ethics and should act professionally towards their students. The employment and certification repercussions for engaging in misconduct or inappropriate relationship with students are grave. Teachers who ignore their responsibilities can be assured that their conduct will trigger discipline, which in all likelihood will include the loss of employment and the suspension and or revocation of their license. Therefore, it is of paramount importance that teachers are educated about every detail that pertains to education, specifically the laws, for them to have the knowledge about how to act as professionals. But before that, allow me to start with the historical basis of education. Many historical events and socio-economical situations in our world have influenced the education. Now, we will look at the most significant characteristics of different historical periods with regards to education and how it progressed up to the present. We'll begin with education in the pre-literate societies. Education at this time were merely the art of transmitting to the individual the intellectual contents of civilization and initiating in the youth the moral life of the community as well as the methods of self-control. The earliest educational process involved sharing information about gathering food and providing shelter, making weapons and other tools, learning language and acquiring the values, behavior, and the religious rites or practices of a given culture. The next one is the education in ancient Africa and Asia. In Africa, specifically in Egypt, priests and temple schools taught not only religion but also the principles of writing, sciences, mathematics, and architecture. Similarly, in Asia, particularly in India, priests conducted most of the formal education. Indian priests taught the principles of Veda, the sacred text of Hinduism, as well as grammar, science, and philosophy. Whereas in China, the curriculum stressed philosophy, poetry, and religion in accord with teachings of Confucius, Laozi, and other philosophers. Next is the education in ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, access to education was determined by gender and class. Education was central to Greek society but simultaneously restricted to a narrow elite. Girls were excluded entirely from education in Athens because schools were neither publicly funded nor state-run. The parents themselves had to provide a place for education. Boys from wealthy backgrounds typically began schooling from the age of 7. In ancient Greece, education was limited to a few key disciplines which were valued in Athenian society as necessary for producing ideal citizens. The schools in ancient Greece were run by a triumvirate of schoolmasters: grammatists who taught writing and grammar, Kytharists, the music teachers, and Paidotribes who handled the physical side of a child's education. Next is the education in ancient Rome. Education among the Romans, though not usually endowed by the state, was very general and was highly appreciated. Its main features were derived from the Greeks. It was intended to develop all the mental powers and to train a man for public life. Children, both boys and girls, began to attend school at the age of 6 or 7 years of age. The elementary studies were reading, writing, and arithmetic, whereas the higher education comprised what were called the liberal arts or artes liberales, including the Latin and Greek languages, composition and oratory, and mental and moral philosophy. Next is the ancient Jewish education. Education among the Jewish people had also had a profound influence on Western learning. The ancient Jews had a great respect for the printed word and believed that God revealed the truth to them in the Bible. Most information on ancient Jewish goals and methods of education comes from the Bible and the Talmud, a book of religious and civil law. Jewish religious leaders known as rabbis advised parents to teach their children religious beliefs, laws, ethical practices, and vocational skills. Both boys and girls were introduced to religion by studying the Torah, the most sacred document of Judaism. Rabbis taught in schools within synagogues or places of worship and religious study. Next is the medieval education. In medieval education, only the wealthy had access to education, and then usually only for boys. There were no public schools, and those who had the privilege of getting an education usually either learned at a home with a tutor or from a school run by the church. A wide range of subjects were taught as part of education during the medieval period. In grammar schools, which typically fell under a large church, subjects such as Latin, rhetoric, Greek, and basic sciences such as arithmetic were taught. Towards the later medieval period, this list included geography and a number of other natural sciences as well. In monastic schools, which were directly associated with monastic orders, a wider latitude was exercised in the choice of subjects. Such schools typically taught directly from the rich treasure trove of Greek and Roman books, often exploring even such subjects such as physics, philosophy, and botany. Next is the education during the Renaissance. Education during the Renaissance emphasized such humanistic disciplines as history, poetry, and ethics. Educational opportunities for women improved slightly during the Renaissance, especially for the upper classes. Some girls from wealthy families attended schools of the royal court or received private lessons at home. The curriculum studied by young women was still based on the belief that only certain subjects such as art, music, needlework, dancing, and poetry were suited for females. For working class girls, especially rural peasants, education was still limited to training in household duties such as cooking and sewing. The next one is the education during the Protestant Reformation. In this period, vernacular primary schools that offered a basic curriculum of reading, writing, arithmetic, and religion for children in their own language was established. Vernacular schools in England, for example, used English to teach their pupils, as they argued with each other and with the Roman Catholics on the religious matters. Protestant educators wrote catechisms or primary books that summarized their religious doctrine in a question and answer format. Vernacular schools provided primary instruction for the lower classes, and the various classical, humanist, and Latin grammar schools prepared upper-class males for higher education. The next one is the educational theory in the 17th century. There was a little change in education in the 17th century. In well-off families, both boys and girls went to a form of infant school called a petit school. However, only boys went to grammar school. Upper-class girls and sometimes boys were taught by tutors. Middle-class girls might be taught by their mothers, and there were also dame schools, usually run by a woman, where young girls were taught skills like reading and writing. During the 17th century, boarding schools for girls were founded in many towns. In them, girls were taught subjects like writing, music, and needlework. The next one is the education during the Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment dominated advanced thought in Europe from about 1650s to the 1780s. It evolved from a number of sources of new ideas, such as challenges to the dogma and authority of the Catholic Church by increasing the interest in the ideas of science in scientific methods. Enlightenment children were taught to memorize facts through oral and graphical methods that originated during the Renaissance. The predominant educational psychology from the 1750s onwards, especially in Northern Europe countries, was associationism, the notion that the mind associates or disassociates ideas through repeated routines. It offered a practical theory of the mind that allowed teachers to transform long-standing forms of print and manuscript culture into effective graphic tools of learning for lower and middle orders of society. Next is education in the 19th century. The foundations of modern education were established in the 19th century. Pestalozzi established schools in Switzerland and Germany to educate children and train teachers. He affirmed that schools should resemble secure and loving homes or environment. Pestalozzi developed a so-called object lesson that involved exercises in learning form, number, and language. Pupils determined and traced an object's form, counted objects, and named them. Students progressed from these lessons to exercise in drawing, writing, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and reading. In here, German educator Friedrich Froebel created the earliest kindergarten, a form of preschool education that literally means child's garden in German. Froebel believed that every child's inner self contained a spiritual essence, a spark of divine energy that enabled a child to learn independently. Also, British sociologist Herbert Spencer strongly influenced education in the mid-19th century, with social theories based on the theory of evolution developed by British naturalist Charles Darwin. Spencer's revised Darwin's biological theory into social Darwinism, a body of ideas that apply to the theory of evolution to society, politics, and the economy and education. Spencer maintained that in modern industrialized societies, as in simpler societies, the fittest individuals of each generation survived because they were intelligent and adaptable. National systems of education. In the 19th century, governments in the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Italy, and other European countries organized national systems of public education. The United States, Canada, Argentina, Uruguay, and other countries in North and South America also established national education systems based largely on European models. Next is the education in the 20th century. The 20th century brought about many changes in education. In this century, schools became more prevalent, more children were being educated, and segregation of schools ended. To begin with, African American, Caucasian, disabled, Native American, Asian American, and Hispanic children were educated separately. But by the end of the century, these students were being educated together. The idea of this century was that everyone deserved an equal education, and attendance was even mandatory in public schools. Overall, the amount of students being educated increased a great deal. Progressive education was also focused in this time, which is a system of teaching that emphasized the needs and potentials of the child, rather than the needs of society or the principles of religion. Among the influential progressive educators were Hermann Lietz and George Michael Kirchsteiner of Germany, Bertrand Russell of England, and Maria Montessori of Italy. Political influences. Political leadership has affected the education systems of many countries in the 20th century. In the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics or USSR under communism, and in Germany under the leadership of National Socialism, totalitarian systems of government imposed strict guidelines on the organization of national education system. Many other countries during the 20th century, including the United States, have sought to balance control of their education system between the federal government and the local government or private organizations. Most countries in the 20th century have also taken steps to increase access to education. And that concludes the historical foundations of education. Now we'll proceed to the laws and its typologies. So what is a law? A law has been defined as a body of rules of action or conduct prescribed by a controlling authority and having binding legal force. That which must be obeyed and followed by citizens subject to sanctions or legal consequence is a law. The main sources of Philippine law are the Constitution, which is the fundamental supreme law of the land, statutes, which includes acts of Congress, municipal charters, municipal legislation, court rules, administrative rules and orders, legislative rules, and presidential issuances, treaties and convention, which have the same force of authority as statutes, and lastly, judicial decisions. Article 8 of the Civil Code provides that judicial decisions applying to or interpreting the laws or the Constitution shall form a part of the legal system of the Philippines. Only decisions of its Supreme Court establish jurisprudence and are binding on all other courts. And there are 8 types of law. The first one is the criminal law. Criminal law concerns the system of legal rules that define what conduct is classified as a crime and how the government may prosecute individuals that commit crimes. The second one is the corporate law. Corporate law is the system of criminal justice that makes sure business adhere to local and federal regulations for conducting business legally. The third one is the international law. International law, commonly referred to as public international law, regulates relations and activities between nations. The fourth one is the commercial law, sometimes called trade law or business law, and it deals with commerce, trade, and consumer transaction. This broad legal field includes areas like bankruptcy, contracts, mortgage and real estate, consumer credit, and banking. Fifth one is the family law. Family law is a legal practice area that focuses on issues involving family relationships such as marriage and adoption, divorce, and child custody, and among others. The sixth one is the constitutional law. Constitutional law refers to the rights carved out in the federal and state constitutions. The majority of this body of law has developed from state and federal Supreme Court rulings, which interpret the respective constitution and ensure that the laws passed by the legislature do not violate constitutional limits. The seventh one is the labor law. Oversees the relationship between employers and employees. Their goal is to ensure that the employees aren't taken advantage by corporation, which typically have more bargaining power or resources than the individual employee. Labor laws govern issues like collective bargaining, unionization, benefits disputes, and more. The last one is the intellectual property law. Intellectual property law deals with laws to protect and enforce rights of the creators and owners of inventions, writing, music, designs, and other works known as the intellectual property. There are several areas of intellectual property including copyright, trademarks, patents, and trade secrets. That's all, Your Honor.
The sources of Philippine educational jurisprudence. Philippine Constitution of 1987, Article 14, Education, Science and Technology, Arts, Culture, and Sports, states that quality education is accessible to all, and in high school and elementary levels, free public education is available. In Section 2.2, elementary education is compulsory for all children of school age. Moreover, in Batas Pambansa 232, Section 16, which concerns about teachers' obligations, stated that every teacher shall perform his duties to the school by discharging his responsibilities in accordance with the philosophy, goals, and objectives of the school. Furthermore, Republic Act 7836, Article 1, which recognizes the vital role that teachers play in developing literate citizens, states that teaching refers to the profession concerned primarily with classroom instruction at the elementary and secondary levels in accordance with the curriculum prescribed by the Department of Education, Culture, and Sports, whether on part-time or full-time basis in the private or public schools. For educational structure, on February 27, 1945, the Department of Instruction was made part of the Department of Public Instruction. In 1947, by virtue of Execution Number 94, the Department of Instruction was changed to Department of Education. During the period, the regulation and supervision of public and private schools belonged to the Bureau of Public and Private. In 1972, it became the Department of Education Culture by virtue of Proclamation 1081. In 1987, it became Ministry of Education and Culture by virtue of Presidential Decree Number 1397. The Education Act of 1982 created the Ministry of Education, Culture, and Sports, which later became Department of Education, Culture, and Sports in 1987 by virtue of Executive Number 117. The structure of DECS has remained unchanged until 1994 when the Commission on Higher Education, or CHED, and Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, or TESDA, were established to supervise tertiary degree program and non-degree technical vocational programs. The Congressional Commission on Education, or EDCOM, report provided for Congress to pass Republic Act 7722 and Republic Act 7796 to create CHED and TESDA, respectively. For educational policies, Child-Friendly School System, or CFSS, is a project of the United Nations Children's Fund, or UNICEF, and the DepEd. Every Child Reader Program, or ECARP, is to develop pupils' reading and communication skills by grade 3. It is designed to improve the delivery of instruction of reading teachers in grade 1 to 3. And an 8-week curriculum provides grade 1 pupils adequate home-to-school transition and readiness experience. For the Brigada Escuela, it began in May 2003. It is observed every May of each year. It is capitalizing on the spirit of bayanihan. It encouraged parents, barangay residents, local businessmen, community, and etc. to volunteer resources
and work collectively for the maintenance and minor repair of schools during the month of May to prepare the schools for the opening of classes in June. Adopt a School is a Republic Act of 8525 or Adopt a School Act enacted in 1988 for the very purpose of providing a venue for the strong and dynamic private sector to participate in nation building through investments in education of Filipino children. ALS, or Alternative Learning System, is a free education program implemented by the DepEd. It is a ladderized, modular, non-formal education program by Department of Education, or DepEd. This benefits those who cannot afford formal schooling and follows whatever is their available schedule. It provides a viable alternative to the existing formal education instruction. It encompassing both the non-formal education and informal sources of knowledge and skills. Teachers that are involved in this program are called mobile teachers for reasons that they often go about teaching in rural and depressed areas where a formal classroom is not available. So who are the target learners of ALS? These are elementary and secondary school dropouts, youths and adults, although in school but overaged for grade 6 and 4th year, unemployed or underemployed OSYs and adults, industry-based workers, housewives, maids, factory workers, drivers, member of cultural minorities or indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities or physically challenged, inmates, rebels, or soldiers and integris. Curriculum and instruction is a field within education which seeks to research, develop, and implement curriculum changes that increase student achievement within and outside schools. The field focuses on how students learn and the best ways to educate. The new elementary school curriculum, or NESC of 1983 to 2002, is the first curriculum to have been tried out gradually year by year during a 6-year period before its implementation. The new secondary education curriculum, or NSEC of 1991 to 2002, is a cognitive, affective, manipulative based. It focuses on substantive and process content, values development, productivity, and technology. The NSEC shall be implemented in all types of public and private high schools, including technical and vocational institutions and high school departments of state colleges and universities starting the school year 1989 to 1990. The Revised Basic Education Curriculum, or RBEC of 2002 to 2010, the objectives of elementary and secondary education serves as the official learning goals of basic education as stated for a particular population of learners, that is, the elementary and secondary education learners. The Education Act of 1982, or Batas Pambansa Bilang 232, provides the general objectives of elementary, secondary, and non-formal education. Features of 2002 BEC or RBEC: greater emphasis on helping every learner becomes a successful reader, emphasis on interactive or collaborative learning approaches, emphasis on the use of integrative learning approaches, teaching of values in all learning areas, development of self-reliant and patriotic citizens, development of creative and critical thinking skill. Curriculum design has the following elements. For stage 1, identify your desired results. Results are desired outcomes. This stage define what students should be able to know and do at the end of the program, course, or unit, or study generally expressed in terms of overall goals, specifically defined terms of content and performance standard. Stage 2, determine acceptable evidence or assessment. Stage 3 is plan learning experiences and instruction strengths. Learning plan details the instructional activities that the students will go through to attain these standards. Instructional activities which are aligned with the standard are designed to promote attainment of desired results. It is critical for us to understand the legal basis because it serves as a guide, particularly for teachers, in how to properly deal with their students. Legal bases are provisions that limit both the teacher and the students in order to avoid situations that may violate the rights of both parties. Understanding these legal bases can help us understand what a teacher is required to do and vice versa. As we all know, innocence is not an excuse from the law. Because teachers are not always aware of the law, they may engage in bad or illegal behavior. However, this should not be used as an excuse because it is expected of a professional teacher to be aware of all legal bases pertaining to education. This is to avoid wrongdoing and to understand the true goal and meaning of education in our country.